assume.
Are you there?
I was going to say, I assume he's better than he sounds.
Yeah, I was concerned.
Just
only
slightly.
Here we go, John. One team in the Super Bowl era, 2001 Patriots, started the season 1-3 and won it all. So ominous number there for Eagle fans who want to believe that if they lose tonight, they're still alive and are a Super Bowl team. The history suggests otherwise.
Yeah, this is a big game. There's no question. I think it's more difficult if they lose this game. I don't think it's impossible to get to the playoffs, but when you start talking about Super Bowl runs, then you have to put home field advantage in the equation, and it just becomes very difficult to get that. So the hurdles become too great, and that's why you rarely see it. I mean, the Patriots started 1-2 last year. They won the Super Bowl. So I don't think this spot is a concern. If you win this game, it becomes more problematic if you lose it. Again, I think you can make a run toward the playoffs, but that Super Bowl becomes farther and farther off because you're not going to get home field. That's pretty much the reality of that part of it.
Yeah, and the Eagles, we know, 7 drop passes, tied for Miami for the most in the NFL. You're tied with Miami in that category. That says you're pretty bad, right? But help is on the way. They're going to get Alshon Jeffrey back. And how much does that put the offense at ease knowing that Alshon is back?
Well, number one, I think we got to see what Alshon. Is it a limited Alshon? Because remember, everyone was excited when Dallas Goedert got cleared to play last week, but he barely played. He dropped the football. He wasn't completely healthy. At least he wasn't completely put into the game plan. So are we going to see a typical Alshon Jeffrey? Then it helps immensely. If it's a limited one, I'm not sure how much it helps. It'll help a little bit more because he's probably not going to drop the football all over the place like everybody else. But so I think it kind of depends. And you also have to be wary of re-injuring it. I mean, if you look at Dallas Goedert, calf injury, same as Alshon, he first injured that in the first preseason game. And the Eagles kept him out of the rest of the preseason, and he aggravated it in week 2. So that's your concern, I think, more than anything else. Is he going to go out there a little bit too quickly? Is he going to aggravate it? Because it's a little early to get desperate, but you certainly sense at least a little desperation from the Eagles' standpoint.
Yeah, and I guess, I think you make a good point how much he can go, because it sounded like Doug felt like Goedert and Jeffrey are both going to be full go, like they're not going to be on pitch counts. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's what he sounded like, but Doug has played that card before. So I do think you have to wait.
Make you write a story, and then you go back and read that story and say, you make me look like a jackass, Doug?
Well, I mean, Doug's big on the competitive advantage card. So sometimes he says something that he hopes will get picked up and Green Bay will notice. And I think he takes that stuff too far. I will admit that. I don't think it's that much of a help, but he's been pretty consistent that he believes that stuff can help his team, so he uses it in any way he sees fit.
John, when you look at these two teams tonight, Eagles and Packers, I see a lot of polar opposites. The Packers have had success early in games on offense. The Eagles have not. Eagles defense and their pass rush, not a lot of success statistically. Packers, on the other hand, a ton of success statistically. What stands out for you there and the glaring differences, and what's most important? What's the key matchup, I guess? Is it Eagles offense versus Panthers defense early, vice versa? How do you break all that down?
Well, I think this is a take-your-temperature game for both teams, to tell you the truth. I mean, I think there's many questions on Green Bay's side as well. I mean, and they've admitted this is the best quarterback that they faced early in their season. They faced, at best, one mediocre quarterback and probably two pretty bad quarterbacks. So that has helped in their good statistics and how they've been able to accomplish things defensively. They've been off the charts on third down successful, but again, against really bad quarterbacks, and Carson has been one of the best on third downs, even during a 1-2 start. So I do think if Green Bay is really as good as they've looked, the Eagles, defensively, the Eagles are probably in trouble. I don't know if you can say they're as good. They've certainly added talent. Zadarius Smith is dealing with a knee injury that cropped up in practice this week. Preston Smith has been a huge improvement. I think they needed to move on from Clay Matthews. It was sort of a mini Eli Manning thing there, too much sentiment. He was really a bad football player the last couple of years. So it was good they finally turned that corner. But the Eagles know Preston Smith from Washington. He's a good player. He's not a great player. The one guy is Jair Alexander, corner. He looks to me like a top 5 corner in this league. And I don't think that's going to change throughout the season. But some of the other guys, Savage is a rookie. There's going to be hiccups there. So I do think people look at this game and say it's insurmountable because of the way the Packers defense has been playing. But I always preach context. You know that on the show, guys.
Yep.
Look at the opponents. Look at the offenses they've faced. It's not great. So, and the one aspect they did face that probably is pretty good is Minnesota's running game with Dalvin Cook, and they got gashed. And they got gashed significantly, I might add.
Well, they're, by the way, real quick, their defensive front, they give up 131 a game, so you can run the ball on this team.
Well, you can if you have Dalvin Cook, but then from the Eagles' standpoint, they don't have Dalvin Cook. They got a bunch of bad running backs, or at least I think Jordan Howard is a competent running back, but the Eagles disagree with me. And I think Miles Sanders, I'm not ready to write him off, but right now as a rookie, he's not ready to play, and they keep throwing him out there. So that's something they have to answer. So that's what I'm saying. There's a lot of questions both ways in this game, and I do think we're going to get some answers.
Staying with the running back topic, John, we had Todd Herremans on earlier, and I asked him about the offense and what he's seen and what are they going to do this week to prepare on a short week. And he said the short week kind of forces their hand a little bit to just keep it simple and go back to basics and potentially some old school football. So
he also agreed that he would like to see more Howard.
Right. That's what I was getting at. Do you think that would force Doug's hand to go more Howard?
No, actually the other way, because, and I've kind of explained this all week, you kind of default to what you are as a team. So they've been preparing all season with Miles as the starter, so you can't really implement a lot of changes. So I think that would lean in another direction. Matt LaFleur said the same thing in Green Bay. You don't have time, and we've talked about it all week. You don't have any practice, essentially. You have no prep. So this is sort of a DNA game. What are you as an offense? What are you as a defense on both sides of the football? And it's not really about the other team. You sort of go in bare bones, and that's why some of these games on Thursday night are really, really ugly, to be honest. A lot like a preseason game because you don't have a lot of time to game plan.
Yeah. John McMullen at JF McMullen, Eagles, Packers tonight, and so many other things to kind of dive into on this one. The Packers are off to a 3-0 start, first time since 2015, despite the fact, John, they've been held under 340 yards total in all 3 games this year. I mean, this is un-Packers-like. They're 3-11 over the past 2 years when they haven't reached that total. So, 2 things. What's wrong with their offense, number one, and we talked about this before. We brought up the game when Philly played Denver a couple of years ago, and Denver had this great defense, or they were supposed to, and then Philly put 55 on them. And it was like, well, they had a good defense. We thought they were good, but it was like 5 weeks into the year. They didn't really play anybody. So was their offense struggling because they're just not that good, or is it because of the new coach, the new offense? And number 2, is the defense legit in your opinion, or is it just because of the schedule they have played?
Well, I think the offense is not a great one as it typically is. I wrote about this today on 973ESPN.com. They totally flipped the script. Typically, it's all offense in Green Bay, and it's overcome a bad defense over the years. Now it's a good defense overcoming a middle-of-the-road pedestrian offense. I do think if you go back, and it's a long time, you got to go back to 2008 when Aaron Rodgers took over, they've been really good offensively, and they've had skill position people at the receiver spots, both outside and inside, that are really good. And this is probably the worst group as a whole that Aaron has ever had. And really, it's Devontae Adams and a bunch of subpar players. Jimmy Graham, people will see that name, but that's not Jimmy Graham from the glory days. I mean, he's not even close to being the player he once was. Running backs, little bit, sort of like Philadelphia, a little bit better, but people overrate them. They're not very good. So Aaron has to do a lot, and then you have a rookie head coach on top of it. Defensively, what I mentioned, there's no question they're better. There is absolutely no question. But they've been bad on that side of the ball for a long time. Question is, how good are they? They've been playing at a Chicago level. They're not that good. And it will come back to the mean as they start playing better quarterbacks, which starts this week. They have a stretch where they're going to start playing good quarterbacks, and you're going to see them fall back to the pack. And just what I mentioned, I mean, we've seen enough of Preston Smith in Washington. We've seen enough of Zadarius Smith in Baltimore to know what they are. They're good players, but they're not great players. And as I mentioned, with the rookies and the young players in the secondary, they're better, they're more athletic, but they're going to make mistakes. And I think that you're start seeing a little bit of that, at least tonight. So it's better, it's good defense, but it's not top 2, top 3 defense, which it looks like on paper right now.
Yeah, 4 interceptions, 12 sacks, tied for third most in the league, both spots there. Both Smiths combined for 8 total tackles, 6 quarterback hits, 5 sacks, and a forced fumble and a partridge in a pear tree in the Packers win over the Broncos on Sunday. On the flip side of that, where's the rush for the Eagles? They have 2 sacks in 2 games, none from their edge rushers, 1 from a safety. And I guess the story of this night could be, does their pass rush interrupt you, and can you interrupt them? If it goes the way that just said, the Eagles could be in for a long day.
Yeah, I mean, if everything stays to form on paper, they're going to be in for a long day. I personally don't think it is going to stay to form.
So how's the
reasons I said.
How's that Packer offensive line then, John?
It's very good at the tackles, and not as good inside. David Bakhtiari's one of the best left tackles in football. Brian Balaga is solid on the right side. Inside, they're not as good, especially at guard. But we've been talking about that for weeks. And I know people are excited about this is a chance for Fletcher to get going. Well, they face some pretty bad offensive lines, starting with Washington and Atlanta and all the issues they had on their offensive line. And I think Detroit was a little bit better, but it's probably middle of the road. It's not great from an offensive line perspective. So I would argue this is the best offensive line they've faced to this point. Mm-hmm. So the Eagles, the Eagles' problems on the pass rush, and everybody's talking about the drops because the ESPN stats and information came out with all that info this week and how historic it was. And that's true. But you know what they also came out with? Brandon Graham and Derek Barnett are getting a pressure rate top 10 in this league. The Eagles are getting decent pressure. They're not getting home. And I think a lot of that has to do with Fletcher Cox. I talked about it earlier in the week. He's not playing the way we expect. And when does that start? Or is it going to start? And I think the Eagles need that. They really do.
Is it going to start tonight? What can Jim Schwartz and Doug and the rest of the locker room do to get that guy going?
Well, I'm not sure they can do anything. I don't think it has to do with scheme. I don't think it has to do with the other team. I think it has to do with the fact he's not 100%. He's coming off a surgery. He didn't have an off season. And I think it has to do with that. And is he ready to play? Was he ready to play? He certainly wasn't ready to play week 1 at his typical all-pro level, and that has continued. So is the conditioning back up to par? Can he handle the double teams? Does he have the same explosion with the foot and the toe issue? I think it's got more to do with health. I don't think it's a scheme issue. Fletcher wrecks games when he's right, so clearly he's not right.
Yeah, and Doug kind of insinuated that Brandon Graham was in a similar spot last year, and we talked about it with Brandon Graham last year that he wasn't the same, didn't look the same at least for the first half of the season, and then second half he kind of changed some things. But keep in mind, John, this team, they lost Long. Michael Bennett's not here anymore. I mean, they lost guys that got to the quarterback and got pressure on the quarterback too, and and not to mention the two tackles. They're down to their third tackle next to Fletcher. So not only do you have a banged up Fletcher Cox, the guys next to him aren't as good.
Yeah, and I think that's a big concern because Malik Jackson's a good player. Tim Jernigan's a good player when he's healthy. Hasn't been, obviously, for a very long time, and now he's out with a broken foot. And all of a sudden, you're down to Hassan Ridgeway, who's, was set to be the fourth defensive tackle, maybe get 10 reps a game, and all of a sudden he's got to amp that up. Akeem Spence was on the street, and now he's the third guy. You got to move Vinny Curry inside at times. They moved Josh Sweat inside at times. So it's created a lot of issues.
Do you expect Hall to be active and get some reps tonight?
Well, he was active last week.
No, I know. I'm saying, but he was active and get some reps. I don't know that he got any reps.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he's going to get significant reps.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty clear that, I just mentioned that pressure rate for Brandon Graham and Derek Barnett. Now, Derek's dealing with a little bit of an ankle, and we know they have confidence in Vinny Curry. So the one guy you're talking about is Josh Sweat. I don't think Josh has played well in his limited opportunities. He made a big mistake on that kickoff return as well, and one of the main reasons that he's been up over Deshaun Hall is his special teams ability. So that would be the spot. But even if you make that move, you're talking, 10, 15 reps a game? So, again...
You got to remember, John, he has turned into the defensive Paul Turner. I mean, everyone's going to ask about him all year because until he gets a shot because he was the most productive.
I hope Colin Thompson is listening because I'll take my shot at the preseason. Example number 3,755, that it doesn't matter.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying, that he was the guy that racked up stats in the preseason.
Lit it up.
And that's an area where the team is kind of struggling. So, hey, how about giving the guy an opportunity to see if he could translate that into the regular season? I'm not saying that I'm just wondering if that's like, hey, we got to get a spark. This guy got to the quarterback. Let's try him.
Yeah, I mean, he did, and I talked about it a lot. I just mentioned pressure rate. There's nothing wrong with the pressure rate of Brandon Graham and Derek Barnett. In fact, I got to look at the list. They're both in the top 10, so they're probably ahead of the Smiths on Green Bay, and people don't realize that. The issue with the Eagles is they haven't been getting home, and I do think there is something to the ability to finish, and I think that's a real thing. And Deshaun proved that he could do that in the preseason. But again, you're talking against a lot of people who are gearing up to try out for the XFL and aren't even in the NFL. So you have to put that into the equation as well. And the point of that pressure rate, they're not sitting Brandon Graham. They're not sitting Derek Barnett. So where's he getting this playing time? They're not sitting Vinny Curry. So the only place you can go is Josh Sweat, and that's a very limited role anyway.
All right, John McMullen. By the way, here's an interesting number for you, and I'd like to see how you pontificate this one. Green Bay, 25% on third down. It's the lowest success rate in 25 years through 3 games for them. Philadelphia's 56%. Yet one team's unbeaten and the other team's 1-2. We always say third down conversion is big. It doesn't seem big in this one. However, at what point does that number catch up to you if you're Green Bay, and at what point does that number help you if you're Philly?
Yeah, there's no question. Remember, we're talking small sample sizes when we throw out these numbers. We're talking 3 games. So both the Eagles have been lights out on third down, and as you mentioned, the Packers have been awful. If that continues over 16 games, those trends are going to go in opposite directions. The Eagles are going to start piling up wins, and the Packers are going to start piling up losses. From Green Bay's perspective, look, I mean, you don't have to think too far back. Forget about all the great receivers there over the years. But if you think about Jordy Nelson and Randall Cobb in the slot and Devontae Adams, now it's down to Devontae Adams and a bunch of guys you never heard of. And there's a reason you never heard of them, because they're not very good. And that's what they're dealing with. They got one receiver who's tremendous, one of the best route runners in this league, and I don't think that's going to work out well for the Eagles because they really, really struggle with route runners. Marvin Jones, a perfect example last week, who's a very good route runner. Adams is much better than even him. So I think you're going to see some ugly moments of Devontae Adams turning people around in that secondary. But you only got to worry about him. Yeah. The other guys, I mean, they're not very good, and that's what Aaron is dealing with.
Well, John, we know these Thursday night games are typically ugly. They're typically low scoring. They're typically, aesthetically unpleasing, unsightly. Give us your description of how it goes down, capped off with the exclusive Football at 4 Johnny Mac score. Look what I did there.
Yeah,
Football at 4 Johnny Mac score. I'm coming up with stuff left and right.
There we go. Got to get Krause to make a logo for that as well. I'm going to go 24-20 Eagles. This is the spot they embrace. They love playing that underdog role, whether it's really realistic or it isn't. And they feel like everybody is against them. And they always step up, it seems, in these situations. I think they're going to do it again tonight. And the narrative's going to flip a little bit. And people are going to say, all right, the Jets are up next. Get this thing going on the right track. And I think they're going to be saying the exact opposite in Green Bay. Maybe we're not as good as we thought we were.
All right, Johnny Mac likes the Eagles 24-20 tonight right here on 97.3 ESPN. Now, I know we have a 1-hour sprint countdown to kickoff show with Bruno and Mays. Are they fitting you in there tonight?
Well, you never know with those two. They're wild cards, but they are supposed to. So I will say that.
All right. Yes. All right. Well, tonight, 6 to 7, Bruno and Mays, countdown to kickoff live at Screwballs and KOP. And that's before the Eagles Radio Network. And then Merrill and Mike take over tonight at 8:20 right here on 97.3 ESPN. We are live at Chickies and Pete's Crab House and Sports Bar in EHT. He is Johnny Mac, and we appreciate your time as always, pal.
All right, thanks. Enjoy the game, guys.